Welcome back. I love Ghostbusters 1 and 2. 1 was the perfect blend of comedy and Halloween-level horror for all ages, and the sequel was a fun return to the world with an even better villain. And I enjoyed Afterlife a few years back as a nice mix of nostalgia and new characters to revive the franchise. After the debacle of Ghostbusters 2016, I wasn't sure that was possible, so I was glad at the time to see it succeed. So when I got the chance to see Frozen Empire a few days ago, I jumped at the chance. Here's my take, mainly from a storytelling and character perspective. More importantly, does it live up to the legacy of the previous films? And does it head in any new directions? As always, grab your popcorn. Let's get started. Set 2 years after the events of Ghostbusters Afterlife, Frozen Empire finds the Spengler family living in New York and working full-time as Ghostbusters. They even live in the old firehouse thanks to Winston Zeddemore, who now owns it, along with another location where he does ghost-related scientific research. The movie brings back much of the original cast of characters, including Ray Stantz, Peter Venkman, Janine Melnitz, and even Walter Peck, who is now the mayor of New York, and still desperately wants to shut down the Ghostbusters as much as ever. The Afterlife cast of characters includes Phoebe, Trevor, and Callie Spengler, as well as Gary Gruberson, Lucky, and Podcast, all of whom have moved out to NYC either permanently or for the summer. And some new faces include a ghost named Melody and a slacker named Nadim, who just might be the key to saving the world. Alright, first let's talk about what didn't work. The list here is longer than the positives, so I'll start with the obvious. The script. The movie starts with our heroes on a call chasing a large, snake-like ghost through the streets of New York. Phoebe gets impatient and slides out in the extendable car seat we last saw in Afterlife, after she's explicitly told not to by her mom Callie. She then proceeds to shoot holes in the sides of buildings, trying to catch the ghost, and eventually Callie uses a flying drone trap to get the job done. And since they've just caused tens of thousands of dollars in damage and endangered who knows how many people, they're hauled in before Mayor Peck. The scene plays out in such a way as to indicate that he's utterly unreasonable and unfair in his assessment. Except he's not. The film in no way establishes that there was any kind of emergency or vital need to take down the snake ghost, especially since it's just flying around and not actually causing any damage itself. It's actually our heroes who do that. Had the film bothered to show just a hint of why it was so imperative that they risk their own lives and the lives of innocent New Yorkers in pursuit of this thing, well, it might have justified their reckless behavior, but as it stands, we're just supposed to side with them because they're the good guys. And it only goes downhill from there. Without spoiling things too much, let's just say things happen in this movie because the plot needs them to, and not because they're a result of characters making rational or realistic decisions. Let me give you a huge example. Following their run-in with the mayor, Phoebe is bummed that she's not allowed to be an active team member because, as the villainous Peck points out, she's a minor who hangs out the side of a fast-moving car and blasts holes in the sides of buildings with a laser gun. It's supposed to be funny when she corrects him to say, it's actually an unlicensed proton beam generator. But long story short, as her family continues to go out on calls, Phoebe sneaks out in the middle of the night to go to Central Park alone to play chess by herself. Wait, what? Not kidding. And the movie presents this as a totally rational thing for a 15-year-old girl to do. And why does she do something that is at once dangerous and completely nonsensical? Because it's how she meets the ghost called Melody, who begins to play chess with her. In other words, the writers need her to have this meet-cute moment, but have no idea how to do so in a logical way. So they force an otherwise brilliant character to behave like an idiot. And that leads me nicely to my second issue. Phoebe is written incredibly poorly, when everything about the character demands that she shouldn't be. I mean, I like the character in Afterlife, and I like the actress playing her, McKenna Grace. In the previous film, she comes across as a genuinely sweet kid who's underestimated and at times out of her depth. But here she's more of a know-it-all who's better at her job than any of the adults, and is supposed to be sympathetic, despite causing literally all of the problems in the film. It's her own fault she's kicked off the team, first for acting recklessly and not listening to her mom, then for insubordination when she's called out for it. And then she's the one who's ultimately responsible for releasing the big bad in the movie. And after she does so, she never once shows actual remorse and says, "I'm sorry." Instead, she says to her mom, "You're mad at me, aren't you?" Well, you just caused a supernatural ice age that killed Lord knows how many people, so probably yeah? Only Callie and Gary, who's trying to be a stepdad, pretty much shrug it off and assure her it's all cool. An example of solid consequence-free parenting and no responsibility taken by the main character. I don't know why they wrote her like this, when the previous film establishes her as a grounded and intelligent kid. The film implies that she's lonely and doesn't have many friends, except that was the plot of the last film. You know, the one where she has real friends by the end, the same ones who return in this movie and who she spends time with? But for some reason, the only person she can relate to is a ghost she just met. And I hate the fact that the script establishes her as essentially an adult in a kid's body. It tells us that it's unfair that she's not allowed to do what grown-ups do. And by the end, she's accepted as just one of the adults. Jesus, what's with modern films making kids capable and wise while turning adults into idiots who can't do anything right? Can't we just let kids be kids? Childhood only lasts a short time, and once it's done forever. I would have so loved if just one of the other characters in this film sat her down and said, "You're a kid. Be a kid. Because once you grow up, you'll never be one again. Enjoy the freedom and joy and lack of serious responsibility that goes with it while you can." And had the film ended with her still a team member, but going off to play with friends, it would have felt way more right. At least much more so than the message that kids can do anything adults can. They can't. And they shouldn't. That kind of responsibility should never weigh down children. And I wish movies would stop glorifying adulthood to children when it should be the exact opposite. And as long as we're speaking about the other characters, the film does them a disservice as well. Other than Phoebe, everyone else is a fairly one-dimensional character. There are a few weak subplots, like Gary wanting to be a dad for the kids and Trevor trying to catch Slimer in the firehouse attic. But overall, they add nothing to the actual plot. The only ones who even come close are Ray's quest to still be an active member of the team instead of being forced into retirement, and Nadim's journey to discover some kind of meaning in his life. The rest are just there, either as a way to cash in on nostalgia or as a means to force the plot in the right direction. As a result, many of the cast aren't given much to work with, which is a shame when you have Paul Rudd and the original team at your fingertips, and all you can give them is a few lines that elicit some chuckles. Because of that, the film overall isn't nearly as funny as it could be. Compare it with the two first films, which are so quotable thanks to scripts full of jokes and great lines. That's not the case here. You have a host of comedic actors at your fingertips, so why not lean into that and write some genuinely funny material for them? I suppose the most obvious answer is that the writers here aren't as good as the ones from the past films. Let's be honest, films in the 80s took a lot more chances in terms of storytelling, whereas movies today played increasingly safe so as not to risk offending absolutely anyone. And safe leads to bland, which now makes up the lion's share of our viewing experience. That needs to change. Now here's what I thought did work. It's a good-looking movie. The cinematography is solid and the CGI is well done. There are a number of visual callbacks to the first two Ghostbusters films, especially with New York skyline and locations, and it was cool seeing Ecto-1 drive through the city streets once again. And while CG is used quite a bit, the ghosts themselves are mainly practical, relying on makeup effects or puppetry, much like in the original films. That was frankly awesome to see. In my opinion, the best use of CG is when it enhances practical effects, and not used as a substitute for them. So I applaud the filmmakers for this bold move. I'm also glad they went with a new big bad instead of rehashing one we've seen before. Garaka is a villain that has a lot of potential. He's physically imposing and quite different visually than other ghosts we've seen in the series, so in that way he stands on his own. but he wasn't as fleshed out as I think he could have been. What we learn of him is through an exposition dump halfway through the movie, and it paints him as an ultimate bad guy. There's even some importance given to his horns, which were removed some millennia ago and are key to his great power. But there wasn't much change in what happened once he got a hold of them again. He froze swaths of New York before getting them, and he did it again after getting them. Maybe it was just on a bigger scale? I don't know. It wasn't very clear. And I would have liked to see him have more of a personality. Or at least a subordinate to do so in his stead. Like Lewis does with Gozer, or Janosch does with Vigo. Thanks to the comedic skills of Rick Moranis and Peter MacNicol, the big bad looks more menacing while they do the heavy lifting of propping him up. Here though, the task is left to Melody, but she plays it so straight and close to the chest that we learn nothing of Garaka from her. Which brings us nicely to Nadim, played by Kumail Nanjiani, who is the other character tied directly to Garaka and honestly is the highlight of this film. Every time he's on screen, I found myself laughing. And unfortunately, those times were few and far in between in this film. Possibly the best scene in the whole movie is a back and forth between him and Bill Murray, reminiscent of the scene in the original Ghostbusters where Egon is interrogating a possessed Lewis. This scene has Nadim wearing the same spaghetti strainer contraption on his head, and it honestly feels more like a great improv than a scripted scene. This film needed so much more of this. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think Frozen Empire is a particularly bad movie. But I don't think it's a particularly good movie either. It's just there. It does nothing to forward the characters or their world. The overall dynamics and relationships are all pretty much the same at the end as they are at the beginning. The first Ghostbusters set up the story and the characters, as well as their various histories together and their relationships as friends and co-workers. It also set up the romantic relationship between Peter and Dana. The sequel furthered those relationships and heavily expanded on the dynamics between Peter and Dana. Afterlife took us in a fresh direction by looking into Egon's world and how his life's work affected his family and their relationships. This film, on the other hand, doesn't really challenge the various character relationships in any real way. Yes, Gary wants to be seen as a dad, and Phoebe is somewhat at odds with her mom. But that's about it. It would have been so much more satisfying if the film followed in the footsteps of the previous films and focused on a storyline built around the cause and effect of one of the founding members' actions instead. If the first was about the team as a whole, the second was about Peter, and the third was about Egon, wouldn't it make sense to create a plot around either Ray or Winston? You could still have it centered around Phoebe and her family contending with the mystery, but the heart of it would have been one of the two original Ghostbusters. And it's almost there anyway in this film. There's already a subplot in place about how Ray misses being a Ghostbuster and wants to be part of it all again. So why not make his character and the backstory more central to the plot and have him directly impact Garaka's release through some past or present action? Then he would play a much bigger part in setting things right. And we would have further insight into another beloved original member. And it would nicely set up the next film, which could then focus on Winston's past and how it affects the present. Overall, I think it's worth a watch, if for no other reason than to see the original team back together again. I just wish they'd given them more to work with. But those are just my 2 cents. Give me yours. I'd love to hear what you thought of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated with the latest content. Until next time, stay creative.